Tropes. Hey everyone, I'm your friendly neighborhood lizard person, and today we're talking about Manic Pixie Dream Girls. What's that? I'm so glad you asked. She's our friendly, life-loving sidekick who's here to teach our brooding young man that cynicism is for losers and loving life is for winners. Quick side note, the Manic Pixie Dream Girls really only include cis women. I'm really sorry, trans ladies, you're wonderful, but you're better than this anyway. Alright, let's get her done. Nathan Rabin, in his review of Elizabethtown in 2007, coined the Manic Pixie Dream Girl trope word, the name. He, quote, exists solely in the fevered imagination of sensitive writer-directors to teach broodingly soulful young men to embrace life and its infinite mysteries. Although the name of the trope wasn't realized until the early 2000s, the trope itself has existed for thousands of years. First seen in Dante's Inferno in 1320, when Beatrice shows Dante around hell. Today we're going to delve into its modern usage and how it perpetuates toxic masculinity and passive femininity. Ooh, fun. When you think of Manic Pixie Dream Girls, you probably think of overtly quirky characters, like Holly from Breakfast at Tiffany's, or Zooey Deschanel. But I want to talk about the more subtle Manic Pixie Dream Girl, her edgy sister, and how to deconstruct the Manic Pixie Dream Girl. In Hugo Schweizer's article for The Atlantic, The Real-World Consequences of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl Cliché, he writes, quote, the Manic Pixie Dream Girl may serve as a catalyst for male transformation, but in both her real and fictional manifestations, she sends the message that a bright and sensitive young man can only learn to embrace life by falling in love with a woman who sees the dazzling colors and rich complexities that he can't. End quote. By that definition, Beauty and the Beast is the paradigm of the MPDG trope. Belle is a smart, book-loving young woman who just isn't like other girls. Love and marriage aren't her priority in life, while the Beast is unrefined and temperamental. The first two scenes of the movie quickly establish that the Beast is a brooding young man who was cursed for his selfishness. When he didn't allow an enchantress to stay the night at his castle, she put a spell on him that could only be broken by true love. The Beast, however, falls into despair and loses hope immediately, thus becoming our melancholy hero who must be saved by the Manic Pixie Dream Girl. The narrator of the scene even goes as far as to tell us the lesson that the Beast must learn, that beauty is on the inside. Then we move on to Belle, who goes into town for a new book. As we learn from the opening song, everyone in town agrees that Belle is beautiful, but she's weird. Even Belle's house is quirky. Matt, can you put the picture there? And there's an obvious design difference between Belle and the three blonde bimbos that show up throughout the first scene, with their titties out, just gawking at Gaston, the hottest man in town. Belle's father leaves town to show off his invention, and soon Belle realizes he's not coming back. So she goes off on her own to find him. I want to point out that Belle has both the autonomy and the courage to go out on her own, which, especially for Disney, is unusual because it's more of a male trait. So already we can see the lessons she must teach to the agoraphobic Beast. Not only does she go out on her own, but she sacrifices herself for her father's freedom. The Beast accepts her offer and kicks her dad out. So what do we know about his character so far? He has a temper, he's fickle, he needs to put a shirt on, he's selfish, and he's bad with people. All things that Belle can fix. After the dinner sequence where all the dishes sing, you know the one, Belle gets a tour of the castle. Here we learn that she's a little mischievous and very curious. She's able to trick Cogsworth not only into giving her the tour, but then into leaving to go to the library while she goes up into the West Wing. So again, this sets her apart from other girls because she doesn't do as she's told. And she also seems to exude some control over the men in her life. This shows that she's both intelligent and responsible for the changes those men go through. After getting caught in the West Wing by the Beast, who then shouts at her, she attempts to flee the castle, thusly getting attacked by wolves. The Beast comes to her rescue, turning the brooding young man into the literal hero. This is the first instance of the Beast doing something for anyone other than himself. And in the following scene, when Belle is attempting to wrap up his wounds, they argue over what should or shouldn't have happened in order for him not to have gotten hurt. This offers him a moment of reflection for the first time in the movie. So as the film goes on, we see the Beast go through a plethora of changes and metamorphoses. He learns to be gentle with the birds, he gifts his library to Belle, learns to eat with a spoon, and finally puts a shirt on. So we have this huge physical juxtaposition between the Beast in the beginning of the movie, when he's literally walking around on all fours like an animal, and the Beast now, who is bathed, wearing dress clothes, dancing like a gentleman, and wearing a shirt. So finally, in the quintessential scene of the movie, Belle looks into the magic mirror and sees her father, sick and collapsing in the woods. And the Beast lets her go. We finally see in this scene that he has learned love for another person and selflessness. But his transformation is not complete yet. The castle gets stormed and Gaston finds the Beast brooding in his bedroom and attacks him. Gaston, as we know, is the epitome of a narcissist. He is self-absorbed and only wants... So as we see Gaston fighting the Beast on the top of the tower, we get to see how much of a coward that Gaston really is, when the Beast is holding him by his throat over the edge of the tower and he's begging for his life, only to attack the Beast when he turns his back on him. Although it is Gaston's own hubris that defeats him, the Beast is also defeating his own internal narcissist. So although yes, the Beast looks beastly on the outside, Gaston was the true monster, who he defeated, showing that he was able to grow and change with Belle's help in the way that Gaston could not. And now we see the Beast literally transform back into his human self, having learned the power of love and self-respect, all because of Belle, who already knew those things. Now, before I move on, I want to pause and take a moment to talk about how old these characters are. Based on the narration of the Beast story, we know that him and everyone else has been cursed for 10 years, and that the curse will be up on his 21st birthday. So he was cursed when he was 11. 11! So this enchantress just pops up in this castle, and this bratty ass child is like, no, you can't come into my house. Literally any child would do that. His parents probably told him not to talk to strangers. So really, who's the villain here, really? Really? I think it's the enchantress. And also she cursed everyone. She put the weight of this curse on this child by cursing everyone he loves. He never got to grow up to be a normal person. And you know how old Belle is? 17. What 17-year-old needs to take on this man's baggage? No 17-year-old needs to fix this 20-year-old man and his problems. Also, I really just want to point out that Belle never kisses the Beast until he changes fully back into a human. She only says, I love you, instead of doing Disney's classic true love's first kiss. They just didn't want her to be a furry. Alright, so now that we've taken the classic example of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl, let's move on to her edgier version. Get ready to be pissed off, we're talking about Ramona Flowers. I haven't read any of the comics, so this analysis is purely based on the 2010 movie directed by Edgar Wright. Excuse me. The movie begins with Scott being his usual gross piece of shit self. He's a broke 22-year-old dating a 17-year-old high school student. And not just any high school student, but a Catholic Chinese schoolgirl. Now, obviously we're supposed to be uncomfortable with this by the multitude of comments like babysitting and it's playtime when they're together. It's even referred to as Scott's mourning phase after his big breakup with Envy Adams. So it's important to note that Scott is not really in this relationship because he likes knives, but because he's desperate for attention. Hence why they haven't even held hands or kissed. The repetition of their date sequence, the arcade, pizza, Goodwill, and the CD store, is there to represent Scott's rut. But after the second date sequence, when Knives asks Scott if he wants to, quote, keep going when they're playing the video game, we see this moment in Scott where he really wants to break up with her, but just decides it's too hard. And he would rather string her along like Envy did to him. So right away, we can see that Scott is the ideal candidate for the gloomy, immature male protagonist. Ramona then magically appears in his life. Literally. He sees her in a dream before they actually meet, only to realize that she's not only real, but she's using the, quote, convenient subspace highway in his head. Right off the bat, she's quirky and weird. Fucking Majoko-ass bitch. And she's right in time to pull Scott out of his rut. The first time they hang out, Scott is surprised that Ramona is on time for their date. So surprised that he admits he had assumed she was too cool to show up on time.
Oh, you assumed wrong.
At this point, Ramona is an idea to Scott. She's hardly a real thinking person. It's important to note that Ramona, like Belle, has autonomy. She changes her mind about having sex with Scott, and when Scott asks about her ex, she says she doesn't want to talk about it. So she has control over her life and thoughts in a way that Scott doesn't. Later in the film, Scott even tries to mimic her by saying he's not ready to talk about Envy, and then immediately starts talking about her, proving that he has little self-control or emotional intelligence. After a few dates with Ramona, she changes her hair color, and Scott can't seem to deal with it. Not only does this reflect Scott's own insecurity about his hair and his perceived correlation to his breakup, but further cements Ramona into the MPDG trope. Ramona is confident and in control of her life, both things that Scott can't seem to grasp. But it's right around this point in the movie that we start to notice a big change in Scott. Although Ramona is the main catalyst for change, all the women in Scott's life has had an effect on him. He just doesn't realize it until Ramona's around. Julie draws our attention to this by telling Scott, quote, maybe it's high time you take a look in the mirror before you wreak havoc on another girl. Then Envy shows back up in his life to antagonize Scott one more time. But unlike the beginning of the movie where Scott is just moping around, he's actually able to face her, even if he was forced into it. We can see Scott is changing when he makes a comment to Ramona about how it sucks when the past comes back to haunt you. After Envy's show, they all go backstage to hang out, where Scott has to fight Envy's boyfriend and Ramona's ex, Todd, the vegan. In this scene, not only is Scott able to defeat another one of Ramona's evil exes, but he also defeats the guy that Envy cheated on him with. Scott is then able to get over Envy and move forward with his new relationship. Sort of. Before leaving, Scott calls Envy Natalie, which allows her a moment of reflection and shows that Scott is now able to move on. Literally erasing Envy and replacing it with Natalie. Get it? But right after getting a small moment of redemption, Scott is right back to feeling sorry for himself and questions why he has to work so hard for Ramona, because he's literally never had to do anything for anyone else before. But Ramona tries to talk some sense into him by saying, no breakup is painless, someone always gets hurt. And she points out Knives and Kim, who both look at Scott with pained expressions. But Scott refuses to acknowledge that he has had any part in hurting them. Then Roxy shows up, and Scott doesn't want to hit her because he thinks he doesn't have the capacity to hurt a girl. He just doesn't realize that he has the emotional capacity to hurt a girl. So Ramona has to literally fight for him by grabbing onto his limbs. She forces him into change and to become a stronger person without Scott having to do much of the work. As the fight comes to an end, Ramona tells Scott that Roxy's weak point is under her knees, and she literally orgasms to death. And in this moment, Scott is realizing his insecurity about being able to please Ramona without really thinking about what he needs to do as a person to become a good partner. For the last two fights, we really get into the meat of Scott's character. Gideon has returned and seduced Ramona by literally putting a chip in her head, and Scott has to fight the Katayanagi twins in the Battle of the Bands. When he sees Gideon with Ramona, his jealousy is manifested into the green monster that battles the dragons of the Kadiyanagi twins. And after the show, he tries to find Ramona and runs into knives, and doesn't realize the correlation here. What's happening to Scott right now is what he had put knives through when he was getting together with Ramona. And yet again, he refuses to acknowledge his faults. Finally, in the last battle of the movie, Scott faces off with Gideon with the power of his love for Ramona. But because he still hasn't realized that his actions have hurt both Knives and Ramona, the scene ends with Scott's death. We return to his dream desert from earlier in the movie, where Ramona teaches him the final, most important lesson of the film, which is, guess what? Self-respect. When Scott is revived for round 2 against Gideon, he is able to apologize to Kim for hurting her and admit that he cheated on Knives and Ramona. And this is the part that really pisses me off. Everyone just forgives him. I know this movie is really self-aware and mostly making fun of these tropes, but oh my god, it's like a man has to think for once in his life and everyone is just okay with it. Like, oh, you're sorry? You learned your lesson? I guess we're all good now. I guess, like, I don't know, the months or years of you being a dickbag are just, it's good, forgotten, all is well. You can cut me off at any time, Matt. Just make it. So when all is said and done, Nega Scott shows up with what would have been the final battle of the movie of Scott defeating his older self. But instead, it's a moment of self-acceptance and forgiveness, because Scott was fighting himself through the whole movie through the evil exes in the same way that the Beast was fighting himself vicariously through Gaston. Each of the evil exes represented his own insecurities, narcissism, and inability to see anything other than his own problems. And while Scott is able to learn and evolve as a character, Ramona stays exactly the same. In fact, she's once again dating another shitty guy who's just like all the other assholes she dated. From the beginning to the end of the film, she's regurgitating the same, I have to run from my past bullshit. To sum up Scott's character, I would like to return to Schwazer's article, The Real-World Consequences of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl Cliché. So here's another quote. The Manic Pixie Dream Girl knows him better than he knows himself, or so he believes. That convenient assumption allows the young man to both adore the MPDG and to avoid any responsibility for reciprocity. How can he be expected to give anything back when she has this magical intuition about the world that so vastly exceeds his own? In other words, Scott will never be good enough for Ramona because although he learned a lot of important lessons, he didn't really learn how to be a good partner. So what's the difference between Belle and Ramona? Belle is a very straightforward representation of the trope. She's optimistic and intelligent, so when adventure comes her way, she doesn't hesitate to seize the opportunity. Everything's fine. Unfortunately, she's still a two-dimensional character that remains the same by the end of the film. One could argue that she changes by being able to see the goodness in the Beast despite his beastliness, but based on her reaction to Gaston, I would argue she had that ability the whole time. So her wisdom and quirkiness exist for the purpose of helping the Beast learn not only how to love himself, but how to love another person. Ramona, on the other hand, is a mixture of tropes. From magical girlfriend to girl with troubled past. Essentially, her past or series of exes come back to haunt not only her, but her newest boyfriend. That, mixed with her magical powers, is enough to make Scott feel inferior, which ultimately leads him to realize that relationships take work. While the Beast is learning a more fundamental lesson, Scott needs to learn a more difficult one, which creates a more complex Manic Pixie Dream Girl. Additionally, while I've said that both women have autonomy, I'd like to point out that everything they do is for the sake of the brooding man. And therefore, what appears to be them making decisions for themselves is really just a tool used by the writer to teach the male hero how to be autonomous himself. So, so it's not true autonomy. We can tell that Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is a pretty self-aware film by literally putting Ramona, the Manic Pixie dream girl, into Scott's dreams, and playing so obviously into the trope. So in a way, this film is doing some deconstruction of its own. The characters are likable, but Scott isn't meant to be a good person. He's not a role model. He's clearly a douchebag. And the film isn't saying you should be like Scott or Ramona. It's more like a warning. The point of the film is to say, we all have a past. We have all had relationships we regret, people we've hurt, people we've been hurt by, and we shouldn't let that shape our new relationships. Rather, we should learn from them. But the point it doesn't get across so well is that women are not responsible for men's personal growth. And that's where John Green comes in. Let me just say that I made sure to rewatch Scott Pilgrim and Beauty and the Beast for this script. I will not reread Paper Towns. You can't make me do it. So instead, I read the article, John Green and His Manic Pixie Dream Girls. Thank you, Mary Jo Cram, for referring to John Green as a Manic Pixie Dream Boy. I like that. Anyway, she writes, quote, "The inciting incident of Paper Towns comes right out of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl playbook. Narrator Q's longtime crush, Margot Roth Spiegelman, always referred to with her full name, turning her into a figure of worship, takes him along on a night of pranks and mayhem, then mysteriously disappears. Q follows clues to find her, taking his friends along on a spontaneous, madcap road trip, only to discover that she's not who he always thought she was, and ultimately to hear her say the same thing back to him herself. The point Green tries to make is that Margot is only a Manic Pixie Dream Girl in Q's head, and not in reality. However, she is still responsible for teaching him that. She's still responsible for teaching him that she's a person. So although she both literally and figuratively runs away from her role as Manic Pixie Dream Girl, she is still, in effect, running right back into the trope. So yes, Q realizes that Margot is a real human, and Margot, who calls Q a paper boy, realizes he had more dimension as a person as well. What Green wants to teach us is that it's really easy to stereotype your friends and think of them more as an idea than a person. But what he really does is makes a Manic Pixie Dream boy fall in love with a Manic Pixie Dream girl. I know that he's trying to use his privileged voice to give autonomy to young women, but he also wrote The Fault in Our Stars. So. TVTropes.com suggests that the Manic Pixie Dream Girl can be deconstructed if she were to, quote, turn out to be dangerously unstable, tipping over into the cute but psycho trope. Or, more realistically, a damaged and unhealthy individual whose childishness, naivety, and irresponsibility quickly either causes them to wear out their welcome or suck the main character into a codependent mess that can only end badly. I mentioned the psycho lesbian in my first video, so in my next video, I will be tackling the cute but psycho trope and psycho lesbians all in one. Finally, I want to offer my own suggestion on how to deconstruct the Manic Pixie Dream Girl trope. Let it die! As I went about my research for this topic, I came across a lot of articles saying the trope was dead or dying. But according to Emily Tannenbaum, that's not the case. Tannenbaum argues that the Amazon original, Chemical Hearts, revives the trope by evolving it slightly. Grace Town, a transfer student with a mysterious past, is a depressed lone wolf with a love for poetry. While she isn't your typical life-loving, quirky girl, she does fall into the not like other girls idea that is provoked by the MPDG trope. Henry Page, main character and artist, attempts to woo her, allowing us to learn more about Grace without giving her any actual character growth. Now, I'll be honest, I don't have Amazon Prime, and I'm not that interested in heterosexual romance, so I didn't watch it. But my purpose for bringing it up is to ask you, the viewer, do you think the MPDG trope is alive? And what are some examples? Alright, it's that time again, the end of the video. So let me tell you why I think it matters. In Schweizer's article, he quotes Laurie Penny as saying, Quote, men grow up expecting to be the hero of their own journey, and women grow up expecting to be the supporting actress in somebody else's. Toxic masculinity teaches us that men must be strong and show no sign of weakness, and emotions are often attributed to weakness, which is why our society deems it acceptable for women to be emotional. Women are allowed to be weak so that men can protect them. In this way, the emotional labor of both men and women weighs on women's shoulders. That's why this quote rings true, because women are expected to support the men in their lives without ever being the hero of their own journey. Schweizer says, quote, in art as well as life, the Manic Pixie dream girl ideal exists because too many men remain intimidated by the women who will not revolve their lives around our needs and our growth. We need to let go of the glorious ladies of our minds and start being fully present with very real women with minds of their own. The MPDG trope often assumes that women are static characters who have no room to grow or evolve, while men must keep learning. Whether this is to say that all women are wise sages or incapable of growth are both harmful ways of saying that women are not the same thinking creatures as men, when in reality, gender is a concept created to separate and box up ideals with neat little bows. Gender is complicated and fluid, and we can no longer be defined by our sex. So to you, movie makers and authors and content creators, this is what I have to say to your heteronormative bullshit. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Check out my blog, The Garrulous Gecko, for writing prompts, reviews, and advice. And buy my book, The Moth That Haunts the Laundry Room, on Barnes & Noble and Amazon. You can also check out my editor, also my lame-ass brother, Matt, on his YouTube and Twitch channel for Let's Plays and whatever the hell else he does. Later. I'm so good at speaking. Matt, please make me less cringy.